Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to continue reading Karlson on the Roof, and this is chapter 4. Karlson makes a bet. Smidge came home from school one day looking very indignant, with a big bump on his forehead. Mom was in the kitchen, and she was just as shocked by the bump as Smidge had hoped she would be. "Smidge, love, what's happened?" she said, putting her arms around him. "Chris threw stones at me," said Smidge angrily. "Goodness gracious," said Mom. "What a bad boy. Why didn't you come straight in and tell me?" Smidge shrugged. "What good would it have done? You can't throw stones. You'd even miss if you tried to hit a barn wall." "You silly boy," said Mom. "You didn't think I was going to throw stones at Chris, did you?" "Well, what else would you throw?" asked Smidge. "There's nothing else, or at any rate nothing that works so well." Mom gave a sigh. Chris obviously wasn't the only one who could lash out when he needed to. Her own little darling wasn't a bit better, but how could this little boy with kind blue eyes be so violent? "What if the pair of you tried to give up fighting?" said Mom. "You can always talk things through instead, can't you?" "You know, Smidge, there isn't a single thing that can't be sorted out by talking it over properly." "Oh, yes, there is," said Smidge. "Take yesterday. I had to fight Chris then, too." "There was absolutely no need to," said Mom. "You could just as well have decided who was right by having a sensible discussion." Smidge sat down at the kitchen table and rested his battered head in his hands. "So you say," he said, glaring at his mother. "But Chris said, 'I can beat you up,' and then I said, 'Oh, no, you can't.' How could a sensible discussion have sorted that out, eh?" Mom had no answer, and her peace lecture came to a sudden end. Her fighter son looked rather down in the bumps, so she quickly put some hot chocolate and fresh buns on the table in front of him. That was something Smidge really liked. He had smelt the lovely, sweet, fresh smell of fresh baking as he was coming up the stairs, and Mom's delicious cinnamon buns at least made life a bit easier to cope with. Smidge sank his teeth thoughtfully into a bun, and while he was eating, Mom put a plaster on the bump on his forehead. Then she gave the plaster a light kiss and asked, "What did you and Chris fall out about today, then?" "Chris and Jemima say Karlson is an invention. They say he's just something I made up," said Smidge. "Well, isn't he?" asked Mom cautiously. Smidge glared at her resentfully over his cup of chocolate. "I can't believe what I say. Can't you believe what I say, at least?" he said. "I've asked Karlson if he's just an invention." "And what did Karlson say to that?" asked Mom. "He said that if he had been an invention, he would have been the best invention in the world. But it so happens he isn't one," said Smidge, taking another cinnamon bun. "Karlson thinks it's Chris and Jemima who are inventions, particularly dim-witted inventions, he says, and I think so too." Mom didn't answer. She realized it was pointless trying to get anywhere with Smidge fantasies, so all she said was, "I think you should play with Chris and Jemima a bit more, and not think about Karlson so much. At least Karlson doesn't hurl boulders at me," said Smidge, fingering the bump on his forehead. Then a thought occurred to him, and he gave Mom a sunny smile. "By the way, I'm going to go and see where Karlson lives today," he said. I'd almost forgotten." He regretted it as soon as he said it. How could he be so stupid to tell his mother? But it didn't sound any more risky or worrying to Mom than anything else he had told her about Karlson, and she said vaguely, "Oh well, that will be fun for you." She wouldn't have been quite so calm if she'd actually concentrated on what Smidge was saying and thought about exactly where Karlson lived. Smidge got up from the table, full and happy and suddenly very content with this world. The bump on his head didn't hurt anymore. He still had the delicious taste of cinnamon bun in his mouth. The sun was shining in through the kitchen window, and Mom looked so nice with her round arms and checkered apron. He gave her a short, hard hug and said, "I do like you, Mom." "I'm glad about that," said Mom. "Yes, I like you because of all the nice things about you." Then he went to his room and sat down to wait for Karlson. he would be going up onto the roof with him. And what did it matter then that Chris said Karlson was just an invention? Smidge had a long wait. It'll be there about 3 or 4 or 5 o'clock, but not a minute before 6, Karlson had said. Smidge wasn't really clear about when Karlson was planning to come, so he asked again. No later than 7 anyway, Karlson said, but hardly before 8. And make sure you're ready at 9 o'clock or roughly thereabouts, because that's when it all happens. Smidge felt as if he was waiting forever, and in the end he decided Karlson must have gone and turned into an invention, and that was that. But all at once he heard the usual whir, and in came Karlson bright and cheery. Oh, I've been waiting for ages, said Smidge. When did you say you were coming? Roughly, said Karlson. I said I'd be coming roughly, and so I have. He went over to Smidge's fish tank, thrust his whole face in the water, and drank big gulps of it. Hey, mind my fish, said Smidge anxiously. Be careful. He was afraid Karlson would swallow some of the little guppies swimming merrily round in the tank. When you've got a temperature, you have to keep drinking like mad, said Karlson. And if a little fish or two slips down by mistake, that's a mere trifle. Have you got a temperature? Asked Smidge. Do you have a fever? I should say I have. Feel here, said Karlson, putting Smidge's hand on his forehead. But Karlson didn't feel particularly hot to Smidge. How high is it, your fever? He asked. Well, 30 or 40 degrees, said Karlson, at least. Smidge had recently had measles, and he knew what having a fever felt like. He shook his head. I don't think you're ill, he said. You're a disgrace, said Karlson, and stamped his foot. Aren't I ever allowed to be ill like other people? Do you want to be ill? Asked Smidge in surprise. Everybody wants to be, don't they? Said Karlson. I want to lie in my bed with a raging fever, and you'll ask how I am, and I'll say I'm the illest and most sickest in the world. And you'll ask if there's anything I want, and I'll say that I feel so ill that I don't want anything, except lots of cake and plenty of biscuits, and oodles of chocolate and whole piles of sweets. Karlson looked expectantly at Smidge, who was standing there at a loss, not knowing where he was suddenly supposed to get hold of all the things Karlson wanted. I wanted you to be like a mother to me, Karlson went on, and you'll say I've got to take some nasty medicine. But then you'll give me 5, or then you'll wrap a warm scarf around my neck and I'll say it itches, unless you give me another 5, or... Smidge very much wanted to be like a mother to Karlson, and that meant he had to empty his piggy bank. It stood on the bookcase, very, very heavy. Smidge fetched a knife from the kitchen and set about prizing open some 5-ore coins. Karlson helped him with great enthusiasm and cheered as each coin came tumbling out. There were some 10-ore and 25-ore coins too, but Karlson liked the 5s the best. Then Smidge ran down to the sweet shop and spent almost all his money on sweets and chocolates. As he handed over his money, he thought for a moment about how he had been saving it all up to buy a dog. The thought made him sigh a little, but he could see that anyone who had to be like a mother to Karlson wouldn't be able to afford to keep a dog. Smidge took a little detour through the sitting room on the way back, with a collection of sweets well hidden in his pockets. They were all sitting there, Mom, Dad, and Seb and Sally, having their after-dinner coffee. But today, Smidge did not have time to join them. For a moment, he played with the idea of inviting them in to meet Karlson, but on further thought, he decided not to. They would only stop him going up onto the roof with Karlson. It would be much better for them to meet him another day. Smidge took a couple of almond cookies from the coffee tray because, after all, Karlson said he wanted biscuits too, and then hurried back to his room. How long am I expected to sit here waiting, all ill and miserable like this? Karlson asked reproachfully. My fever is rising several degrees a minute. You could boil eggs on me now. I went as fast as I could, said Smidge, and I bought so much. But I hope you still got some money left, so you can give me 5-ore when the scarf itches, said Karlson anxiously. Smidge reassured him. He had kept back a few 5-ore pieces. Karlson's eyes shone and he jumped for joy. Oh, I'm the illest in the world, he said. We'd better hurry up and get me into the bed. Only now did Smidge start to wonder how he was going to get up onto the roof, since he couldn't fly. Easy now, take it easy, said Karlson. I'll put you on my back and Hasten Hobson will fly up to my place. Just make sure you don't get your fingers caught in the propeller. But do you really think you can carry me? Asked Smidge. Well, we'll find out then, said Karlson. It'll be quite interesting to see if I manage to get further than halfway while I'm all ill and miserable like this. But there's always the option of tipping you off if I find I can't manage. Smidge didn't think being tipped off halfway up to the roof sounded a very good option, and looked a little worried. It'll be fine, I'm sure, said Karlson, just as long as my motor doesn't stall. But if it does, we'll crash, said Smidge. Splat, we certainly will, said Karlson cheerfully. But that's a mere trifle, he said, flicking his fingers. Smidge decided to think it was a mere trifle, too. He wrote a little note to Mom and Dad and put it on the table. It would be best if he had time to get back before they saw the note, but if they happened to miss him, they would need to know where he was. Otherwise, there might be the same fuss at the time at Granny's, when Smidge took it into his hands to go on the train by himself. Mom cried afterwards and said, "Oh, Smidge, if you wanted to go on the train, why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted to go on the train," said Smidge. It was the same thing now. He wanted to go up to the roof with Karlson, and that meant the best thing was not to tell anyone. If they discovered he was gone, he could always argue that at least he had written that note. Karlson was ready to go. He turned the winder on his tummy, and his motor started to work. "Jump on," he said, "and we're off." And off they went, out through the window and up into the air. Karlson did an extra circuit over the top of the nearest buildings to check his motor was working properly, and it was chugging away so smoothly and evenly that Smidge wasn't the least scared and found he was enjoying himself. Finally, Karlson landed on their own roof. "Now let's see if you can find my house," said Karlson. "I'm not going to tell you it's behind the chimney. You'll have to work that out for yourself." Smidge had never been up on a roof before, but sometimes he'd seen men clearing snow, walking about on roofs with ropes tied around their waists. Smidge had always thought they were lucky to be able to do that, but now he was just as lucky himself, though he did not have a rope around his waist. Or, of course, he had such butterflies in his stomach as he balanced his way along to the chimney. Sure enough, there behind it lay Karlson's little house. Oh, it was so sweet, with green shutters and a nice set of front steps to sit on if you wanted. But right now, Smidge just wanted to get inside the house as soon as possible to see all the steam engines and cockerel paintings and everything else Karlson had. There was a sign over the door so you knew who lived there. "Karlson on the roof, the world's best Karlson," the sign said. And Karlson flung the door open wide and shouted, "Welcome, my dear Karlson, and you too, Smidge." Then he rushed in first in front of Smidge. I've got to get to bed because I'm the illest in the world," he shouted, and dived headfirst onto a red-painted, rib-backed settee against one of the walls. Smidge followed him in. He was so curious, he thought he might go pop. It was jolly nice at Karlson's. Smidge could see that at once. Apart from the settee, there was a carpentry bench, which Karlson obviously also used as a table, and then a cupboard and a couple of chairs and an open fire with an iron grating over it. That must be where Karlson did his cooking, but there were no steam engines to be seen. Smidge took his time looking around, but couldn't spot a single one, and in the end he had to ask, "Where do you keep your steam engines?" Said Karlson. "My steam engines. They all exploded. Faulty safety valves, the lot of them. But that's a mere trifle and nothing to be glum about." Smidge looked all around again. "But what about your cockerel pictures then? Did they explode too?" he said sarcastically. "They most certainly did not," said Karlson. "What do you think that is?" he asked, pointing to a piece of card pinned on the wall next to the cupboard. Right down in one corner of the card there really was a cockerel, a tiny red cockerel. Apart from that, the piece of card was blank. A very lonely cockerel, that picture's called, said Karlson. Smidge looked at the little cockerel. Karlson's 1,000 cockerel bird pictures. This was this pathetic little bird, all there was when it came to it. A very lonely cockerel, painted by the world's best cockerel painter, said Karlson, his voice trembling. Oh, how beautiful and sad that picture is. But I mustn't start crying, or my fever will go even higher. He threw himself back against his pillows and put his hand to his forehead. You're supposed to be like a mother to me, so get started, he said. Smidge didn't know quite how to begin. Have you got any medicine? He said dubiously. Yes, but none I want to take, said Karlson. Have you got 5 ore? Smidge fished a coin out of his trouser pocket. Give me that first, said Karlson. Smidge gave him the coin. Karlson gripped it tightly with his hand, looking very sly and pleased with himself. I know what sort of medicine I can take, he said. What sort then? Asked Smidge. Karlson on the roof's cock-a-doodle-moo medicine. It's half sweets and half chocolate, all stirred up with some bits of biscuit. But get some ready. Then I can take a dose straight away, said Karlson. It helps bring down your fever. I don't believe you, said Smidge. Let's bet on it, said Karlson. I bet you a bar of chocolate I'm right. Smidge thought maybe this was what Mum meant when she said you could decide who was right by having a sensible discussion. Shall we bet on it? Asked Karlson again. Go on then, said Smidge. He got out the 2 bars of chocolate he'd bought and put them on the carpentry bench so they could see what was at stake. Then he mixed up some medicine using Karlson's recipe. He took some acid drops and raspberry jelly sweets and toffees and mixed them in a cup with the same number of squares of chocolate. And then he crumbled the almond cookies and sprinkled them on top. Smidge had never seen a medicine like it in his life, but it looked very tempting, and he almost wished he had a temperature of his own so he could try it too. But Karlson sat there on his bed, opening his beak as wide as a baby bird, and Smidge quickly found a spoon. Pour a good big dose down me, said Karlson. So that was what Smidge did. When they both sat still, waiting for Karlson's temperature to come down. After half a minute, Karlson said, You're right, it hasn't helped. I've still got a fever. Give me the bar of chocolate. Give you the chocolate, said Smidge in surprise. But I won. Since you won, it surely isn't asking too much for me to get the chocolate, said Karlson. There has to be some justice in this world. What's more, you're a horrid little boy sitting there expecting chocolate because I've got a fever. Smidge reluctantly passed the bar of chocolate to Karlson. Karlson immediately sank his teeth into it and said as he chewed, No sour faces, thank you. Next time I win, and you'll get the bar of chocolate. He chomped away with relish. And when he had finished the very last bite, he lay back on his pillows and gave a heavy sigh. I feel so sorry for everyone who's ill, he said. I feel so sorry for me. I suppose we could always try a double dose of the cock-a-doodle-moo medicine, but I don't believe for a minute it'll work. Oh, yes, I think a double dose should do the trick, Smidge said quickly. Shall we have a bet on it? Smidge could be cunning too, you see. He was convinced even a triple dose of cock-a-doodle-moo medicine wouldn't cure Karlson's high fever, but he did very much want to lose the bet. Because he only had 1 bar of chocolate left, and he would get to keep it if Karlson won the bet. A bet that's fine by me, said Karlson. Mix up a double dose. Where temperatures are concerned, you have to try simply everything. All we can do is test it and see. Smidge mixed up a double dose of the medicine and stuffed it into Karlson, who gladly opened wide and swallowed it all. Then they sat still and waited. After half a minute, Karlson leapt out of bed, beaming with delight. It's a miracle, he shouted. My fever is normal. You've won again. Pass me the bar of chocolate. Smidge sighed and handed over his last bar of chocolate. Karlson gave him a disapproving look. Moody brutes like you should never make bets, he said. It's all right for folk like me who go about like little sunbeams whether we win or lose. There was a silence for a moment, apart from the smacking of Karlson's lips as he gorged on the chocolate. Then he said, "But since you're a greedy little boy, I suppose we'd better share the rest in a brotherly fashion. Have you got any sweets left?" Smidge felt in his pocket. "3," he said, pulling out 2 toffees and a raspberry jelly sweet. "3," said Karlson. "You can't divide those equally. Even the littlest child knows that." He took the raspberry jelly sweet from Smidge's outstretched hand and gobbled it up. "But now you can," he said, and he eyed the 2 toffees hungrily. One was a little bit bigger than the other. "Since I'm so good-natured, I shall let you choose first," said Karlson. "But you do know, don't you, that the one you choose first has to take the smaller toffee," he went on, looking sternly at Smidge. Smidge thought about it for a minute and had a good idea. "I want you to choose first," he said. "All right, if you insist," said Karlson, and grabbed the biggest toffee, which he stuffed straight into his mouth. Smidge looked at the little toffee still lying in his hand. "Hey, I thought you said the ones who chose first had to take the smallest." "Now listen here, you greedy little pig," said Karlson. "If you got to choose first, which one would you have taken?" "I'd have taken the smallest one. Really, I would," said Smidge, honestly. "So what are you making a fuss about?" asked Karlson. "You jolly well got the one you wanted." Smidge wondered again if this was the sort of thing Mum meant by a sensible discussion. But Smidge never stayed in a bad mood for long. It was good news, after all, that Karlson hadn't got a temperature anymore. Karlson thought so, too. "I shall write to all the doctors and tell them the cure for a high temperature. Try Karlson on the roof's cock-a-doodle-moo medicine. I shall write the world's best high fever cure." Smidge still hadn't eaten up his toffee. It looked so wonderfully chewy and delicious that he wanted to admire it for a while first. Once he started eating it, it would all be nearly over. Karlson was looking at Smidge's toffee as well. He looked at Smidge's toffee for a long time, put his head on one side, and said, "Shall we make a bet that I can make your toffee disappear by magic without you seeing?" "Oh, you won't be able to," said Smidge. "Not if I stand here holding it in my hand and look at it the whole time." "Let's bet on it," said Karlson. "No," said Smidge. "I know I shall win, and then you'll get the toffee." Smidge knew this was the wrong way to decide a bet, because it never worked like this when he made bets with Seb or Sally. "But we can make a bet the ordinary, proper way, so the one who wins gets the toffee," said Smidge. "Whatever you like, you greedy little boy," said Karlson. "Let's bet I can make the toffee disappear by magic without you seeing it." "Go on, then," said Smidge. "Hocus pocus filiocus," said Karlson, and grabbed the toffee with his hand. "Hocus pocus filiocus," he said, and popped it into his mouth. "Stop!" shouted Smidge. "I did see you make it disappear." "Oh, did you?" said Karlson, swallowing quickly. "Well, then you've won again. I've never known a boy win so many bets." "Yes, but the toffee," said Smidge, totally confused. "The one who won was supposed to get the toffee." "Yes, that's true," said Karlson, "but I've made the toffee disappear by magic, and I bet I can't make it come back." Smidge said nothing, but he was thinking that as soon as he saw Mum, he would tell her sensible discussions were no use at all for deciding who was right. He felt in his empty trouser pocket, and guess what? There was another toffee that he hadn't noticed before. A lovely big, chewy toffee. Smidge laughed. "I bet you I've got another toffee," he said. "And I bet you I'm going to eat it straight up," he said, and popped the toffee swiftly into his mouth. Karlson sat down on the bed, looking sad and sulky. "You were supposed to be like a mother to me," he said, "but instead all you're doing is stuffing yourself. I've never seen such a greedy little boy." He sat in silence for a while, looking even more dejected. "And by the way, I never did get that 5 for wearing the itchy scarf," he said. "No, but then you haven't been wearing a scarf," said Smidge. "But there isn't a single scarf in the whole house," said Karlson peevishly. "But if there had been, I would have worn it, and then it would have itched, and I would have gotten 5 or." He looked imploringly at Smidge, and his eyes were full of tears. "Should I be made to suffer because there isn't a scarf in the house, do you think?" Smidge didn't think he should. So he gave Karlson on the roof his last 5, or coin. That's the end of the reading for today. The next chapter is one of my favorites, and that I will read on Wednesday. So thanks a lot for tuning in to listen, and I hope to see you on Wednesday. Have a beautiful, beautiful day.